From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay.
If you can cut down on waste, save money, and increase production, that's a better way to farm.
Feeding cattle, it can be a messy task, but a new system is making it easier on people and animals. The fight against flooding, as yet more rain brings more problems.
It's tough to forecast the river right now.
As farmers continue to battle rain and floods to plant.
In my neck of the woods specifically, it's a disaster.
AgDay, presented by the all-new Chevy Silverado, the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Last week at this time, things were looking up when it came to planting, with 92% of the corn crop finally in the ground. But after a week that saw more rain, were farmers able to get more planting done? And new crop progress numbers show they were. Corn now 96% planted. Usually by now, it's all in the ground. Ohio, Missouri, and Michigan still running the furthest behind. Ohio at 65%, Missouri just 1% more, Michigan at 69%. As for conditions, 56% is ranked good to excellent. That's down 3% from last week. Farmers continuing to try and plant soybeans as well. The 18 states surveyed, now 85% planted, the 5-year average 97%. Ohio, Missouri, and Michigan also running behind here. Angie Setzer of Citizens Grain in Michigan says the evidence is everywhere.
There are some areas that look all right. They stayed drier to the north. I have a customer up in the tip of the mitten that all of his corn's in, and right now it looks pretty good. In my neck of the woods specifically, it's a disaster. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying that because it is.
And we're getting our first condition update for soybeans. Only 54% of the states are reporting good to excellent beans. That's compared to 73% this time last year. Controversy continues to surround America's largest dairy, Fair Oaks Farms in northern Indiana. The farm still facing backlash after videos were released by an animal rights group showing alleged abuse on the farm. The Newton County, Indiana prosecutor now saying investigators are looking into whether an animal rights group worker coerced employees at the dairy farm into the abuse of young calves that was captured on the undercover video. That group, Animal Recovery Mission, firing back, calling for the investigation at Fair Oaks to be reassigned outside Newton County. That's because the group claims Newton County prosecutor Jeff Drinsky has a conflict of interest, alleging Drinsky's daughter is currently employed as a tour guide at Fair Oaks and that the Drinsky family is a member of We Stand with Fair Oaks Farms, a social media group. Now, we reached out to We Stand with Fair Oaks Farms on Facebook and received the following statement, quote, "None of us have ever been employed by Fair Oaks Farms or the Newton County Attorney's Office, nor had any serious contact with anyone from either entity. What ARM is attempting to do by pointing out connections between the attorney and ourselves is to delegitimize or outright halt a legitimate investigation of their activities," end quote. ARM says until the case is reassigned, it will not work directly with the prosecutor. A big event ahead later this week when President Trump meets Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Japan. Now, many analysts predicting the two leaders will commit to continuing trade negotiations. It remains to be seen if it will diminish the threat President Trump has made to put tariffs on all remaining Chinese imports. The U.S. Trade Representative published a notice announcing it will begin accepting exclusion requests from importers on June 30th for China origin imports. And U.S. ag exports to China continuing to trend downward. New numbers show Chinese imports of U.S. agricultural products fell 55% in the first 5 months from a year ago. Shipments from other nations grew, including from Brazil, Australia, and Canada. China's production of proteins increased to replace pork output hit by African swine fever. And because of African swine fever, China continues to import meat regardless of trade tensions. In May, China bought a record 556,000 tons of meat and offal. That's up about 45% from a year earlier. For the first 5 months of the year, China purchased more than 2.2 million metric tons, 23% higher than a year ago. By meat, pork led the way on a percentage basis, up 63 points, followed by lamb, beef, and frozen chicken. The first genetically engineered salmon are set to go on sale in the U.S. next year, and for the landlocked fish farms producing them, it could mean big business. Inside a sprawling complex in rural Indiana, thousands of salmon eggs genetically modified to grow faster than normal are hatching into tiny fish. The eggs were shipped to the U.S. from Aqua Bounty's Canadian location last month after clearing final regulatory hurdles. The fish will grow to full size in 18 months, roughly twice as fast as regular salmon. And the facility manager says this is a high-tech plant, and Aqua Bounty salmon will be produced more efficiently, growing to about 10 pounds without antibiotics, chemicals, and waste associated with traditional fish farming.
The early stages of production here are very, very similar to the rest of Atlantic salmon production at the moment. The fish are reared in tanks, in hatcheries, in the nursery aspect. Where it starts to be different is that we take the fish at a time when they would usually be transferred into sea cages, and we continue the process in tanks with systems that clean and reuse the water.
What this effectively does is it allows the salmon to grow year-round, so in the winter and the autumn as well as the spring and the summer, which means instead of taking 3 years to reach full size, the salmon take 18 months.
Aqua Bounty says it hasn't sold any fish in the U.S. yet, but it says salmon may first end up in restaurants or university cafeterias, which would decide themselves to tell diners that the fish are genetically modified. It's the time of year for some fantastic sunrises and sunsets, as meteorologist Cindy Clausen shows us in today's crop comments. Cindy.
That's right, Clinton. And this picture is of a beautiful sunrise. It was shared by Lucy Probin. Now, she says this was taken in western Wyoming. Look at the color in there. You can see a vintage sheep camp there. Now, she says the alfalfa cedar you see was forced to stop for a while because of rain. Let's take a look at our wind speed forecast for the day today. And we're going to be seeing slightly stronger winds up in the Great Lakes area. And you could see some of those winds kind of picking up in parts of the Midwest as well, and then over into parts of the western United States. Heading into overnight hours we go. We're going to see those winds again over by the Great Lakes, but calming down most everywhere else. Through the day on Wednesday, we'll see those winds picking up in the western and southwestern parts of the country. I'll have your national forecast coming up, but for now, here are some hometown temps.
Introducing Farm Journal TV, on demand 24/7. AgDay, Machinery Pete TV. U.S. Farm Report on your phone and tablet. Download the Farm Journal TV mobile app today.
McDonald's customers are apparently loving it when it comes to fresh beef. USA Today reporting McDonald's sales of its iconic Quarter Pounder are up 30%. It comes after the fast food giant swapped out the frozen patties for fresh burger last year. McDonald's has so far not announced plans for a meatless burger in the U.S., unlike some competitors. It did unveil the big vegan TS in Germany last month, but there are no plans right now to bring it here to the U.S. How high do corn prices need to be for you to pull it out of the bin? We'll talk about old crop, storage, and prices coming up. And later, making sure forage makes it to the cows' bellies and farmers stay safe. A new way of feeding coming up in the country.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Grain starting the week in the green, with traders looking ahead to Friday's updated acreage report from USDA. Here's more now from the CME.
Today in the grain market, soybeans were higher. The worries over the acreage reduction really was the shot in the arm the market needed and started to push it higher. The June 28th report really promises to be a doozy coming up. And the G20 summit also happening this week could possibly bring some positive talk of a resolution. That definitely will help the soybeans a lot. Now, corn is higher as well, and it's strengthened much more. The futures are firm really ahead of this USDA report coming up. We know that funds are now establishing a much longer position that could definitely add to the upward momentum. Wheat was also higher, and KC wheat was leading the complex and really up well into the double digits. Today in the livestock market, cattle was lower. The technicals are really pressuring those futures down. It's really bringing that follow-through selling. The market has been oversold, but because of the bearish cattle on feed report, really pushing it lower. All the beef markets are definitely an oversold situation right now. Perhaps they're being helped along by the hogs. It was down big again. We had the expanded limits. There's just widespread liquidation going on, and the expanded limits did play a role because we're beyond that $3 mark, and it's just a whitewash of the longs.
Angie Setzer with Citizens Grain, our guest today. Angie, let's talk about what we have in storage, because at some point we have to make a decision. Is this market, has it rallied enough to start to sell it? Is their basis strong enough to pull it out of the bin? What do you think as a grain buyer?
As a grain buyer right now, I am telling you that no, it's not at this point in time, I guess. I mean, there are some active sales taking place, obviously. Sure. I heard a week ago that 70 over traded in Ohio. So it traded. So that obviously was enough to entice someone to sell. We're seeing the rail market heat up. We're seeing bids really kind of heat up. But I'm going to tell you, most of the farmers that I'm working with are not in a big hurry to move what they have. Even had the ability into a feeder last week. He asked me, he said, throw out some $5 numbers and see if you can get some $5 corn bought. And it intrigued people, but it didn't get any bushels bought at that point. No. So it's interesting to see what's going on. Obviously, it's really early. So depending on what the market does here over the next couple months, it is going to make a big difference. But I'm going to tell you, in the areas where the corn is not planted, me specifically in my neck of the woods, we just happen to be, our elevators are sitting in a trade area where if we got 40% of our intended corn acres planted, that's probably a generous estimate. Oh, wow. And so beans are worse. I'm maybe 10% of beans. So I'm looking at a reduced wheat carry-in, wheat production coming at me. I'm looking at a reduced corn production coming at me, and I'm looking at a reduced bean production coming at me. So I'm going to be holding on to old crop so I can actually take part in what happens in the new crop structure. And I think a lot of places in these areas where the holes, that have been hardest hit, they need to do that. An elevator doesn't make you money when it's sitting empty. Now, obviously, it doesn't make you money if you pay too much for old crop supplies either. So it's a fine line that you have to tread. But old crop right now is just not necessarily moving unless you're in an area. Now, if you're in an area where the crop looks good and you know you're going to have good production and you're sitting there thinking that you're going to get that 70 over that's taking place in the disaster zone that is Ohio, quit holding your breath. I mean, you want to take advantage of good marketing opportunities that you would have been all over 2-3 months ago. Okay. And so you've got to know your local area. You've got to know what is taking place around you and trade accordingly. Don't hope for someone else's market. Okay, that's good advice. Appreciate it. Thanks so much. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a minute.
For help solving your cash grain problems, call Angie Setzer with Citizens LLC at 800-858-3738. The IBM Watson Decision Platform for Agriculture, helping to feed a hungry world with the power of AI.
The latest U.S. drought monitor showing overly dry conditions are currently affecting just 10% of the country. That's up a point or so from a record low of 8.8 a month ago. NOAA's anticipating this wetter than normal weather will likely stick around in July for a large portion of the central U.S., including most of the western Corn Belt and Central Plains. And Cindy, it has been a pretty wet spring and start to summer. And everyone is wondering, does this stay through July?
Yeah, and it really appears that we're just going to be kind of in this wet pattern for a little while longer. Okay. But we do see some more heat building into areas that haven't been super hot yet either. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but let's take a look at our map. And as we head through the day, notice we have several frontal boundaries across the country. Nothing super strong though. The rain is going to be concentrated around our low over in the Great Lakes. We're also going to be seeing some moisture along the Gulf Coast states. And watch as this frontal boundary starts to bring in some showers and thunderstorms right here in the heart of the Corn Belt. Heading into the overnight hours, some of that rain pushes off to the south. And then as we head through Wednesday, we'll start to see some of that moisture picking up. We're going to see the heat starting to pick up as well. And it's one of those situations where you have the heating of the day and you could see some of those showers and thunderstorms popping up, especially as we get into the southeastern part of the country. Now, as far as precipitation, the past 24 hours, it's mainly been in the mid-Atlantic states up into the Great Lakes, and then of course down in the central and southern part of Texas. Adding on the next 24 hours, I think the main focus is going to be along the Gulf Coast states, but you could see some of that moisture. You've got that frontal boundary that's in parts of the Corn Belt, so we'll see some scattered showers and thunderstorms moving through there as well, and a little bit into the northwestern United States. Now, the cool temperatures are going to remain in the northwestern United States. A lot of heat though in the southern and central United States. You've got a lot of 90s in the south southeast and also down in parts of Texas. But we've got that heat building in to parts of the nation's midsection, a little further east than what we have been seeing more recently. Temperatures in the overnight still very mild, a lot of 60s and 70s. The cool spots down into the northeast are more comfortable, as you might say. It's going to be seeing a lot of humidity as well. Got the 80s all the way coming up into Minnesota. You see that warm air spreading into parts of the Great Lakes as well. Now, as we look at the jet stream, you're going to see what's going on. As we head through the week, we see this ridge continuing to build. And that's going to bring warmer and warmer air as we get into the weekend to the nation's midsection. The cooler spots will be in the northeast and into the far northwest. But we're looking at warmer temperatures building in as we get into the next week. That's your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Yuma, Arizona, sunny and hot for you today with a high of 102 degrees. St. Joseph, Missouri, showers and thunderstorms possible, especially later today. High temperatures in the upper 80s. Oxford, Maine, showers and thunderstorms, high of 70.
A battle is brewing in China over dairy and the Olympics, and later feeding cattle by giving them their own kind of plate. That's ahead in the country. More dairy cows are getting culled. That's according to new numbers from USDA. It reports dairy farmers culled 258,000 cows in May. That's 13,000 head more than a year ago. It represents an increase of 5.3%. Culling was down, though, from April. For the year, culling is up 75,000 head. China's biggest dairy company says it may pull out of sponsoring the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. It's all over a rivalry with another company. Inner Mongolia Yili Industrial Group lashed out at China Mengyu Dairy. It's for allegedly infringing on its status as a sole sponsor of dairy products at the Beijing Games. But Mengyu has supposedly signed up to be a joint beverage global partner of the International Olympic Committee with Coca-Cola, bypassing local organizations and government agencies. Now, the two companies are fierce rivals in China's $62 billion dairy products markets. It's projected to overtake the U.S. to become the world's biggest by 2022. Feeding animals can sometimes leave a mess behind, but there's a system for feeding cattle that seems to be catching on. See how it works next.
In the Country is powered by Kawasaki. Let the good times roll.
Tennessee cattle farmers have a new, more efficient way of feeding their herds: clean, dry hay. University of Tennessee Extension and Ag Research is experimenting with fence line feeders. It's a system that seems to work better for animals and their human caretakers. Charles Denny has more on keeping hay off the ground and getting more of it to the cattle.
Rather than have cattle eat off the ground, why not give them their own plate? The hungry herd at UT's Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center at Lewisburg mixes a little feed with hay as part of their diet. But it's not what they're eating, but where and how. The cattle, 200 head in the Tennessee Beef Heifer Development Program, grazed at a fence line feeder, one of 7 built at this farm. At some feeders, there's a concrete base for footing, and the hay is served from a higher point.
The animals are on a good pad, so from the animal health standpoint, they're not in the mud. We know from research that if we get above 8 inches of mud, cattle performance really declines.
Animals seem to like this system, and their human handlers do as well. The farm crew here says it's quicker, cleaner, and safer to feed the animals this way, and you don't run the risk of tractors getting stuck in the mud. The fence line feeders prove their worth in the challenging weather. By providing a flat, dry feeding area, less forage is wasted and trampled in the ground, and more ends up in the cows' bellies. And when such large animals congregate, they can injure each other and people.
It keeps the producer away from the crowd of cows trying to get to the hay bale, so there's not a chance of getting knocked down by an animal or accidentally spearing an animal with the tractor and that kind of thing, because you're on one side of the fence and they're on the other.
UT's Institute of Agriculture was able to do this construction with a USDA climate change adaptation grant. Climate change could include more pronounced floods and droughts in the future, and the fence line feeders could prove useful in either scenario.
So obviously in our livestock systems, when we have drought situations, we can't produce as much hay, so we want to see if we can make as much use of our hay as possible. Obviously, if we have more floods, especially in the winter months, we're going to see significant hay losses there.
Also, the feeders have been strategically placed around this UT Ag Research Center, near hay barns and watering systems. This is Charles Denny reporting.
All right, thanks, Charles. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. It's been part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.